The torpedo struck on the starboard side below the waterline, detonating near the engine room. The explosion knocked out the electrical systems immediately. The ship went dark. Emergency lighting flickered on in some compartments and failed in others. The Dorchester began to list to starboard at once. The wound was catastrophic, and everyone aboard could feel, in the way your body registers these things before your mind catches up, that the ship was going down. 900 men came awake in the dark. What follows is not a story about a ship. It's a story about 4 men who had been strangers from 4 different faiths, and what they did in the 27 minutes before the Dorchester went under. The 4 Army chaplains had joined the ship at St. John's, Newfoundland. They were traveling with the troops they had been assigned to serve. Father John Patrick Washington was a Catholic priest from Newark, New Jersey. He had grown up in an Irish immigrant family and was known to his friends as a man who sang genuinely well and at any occasion. He was 34 years old. Reverend George Lansing Fox was a Methodist minister and a veteran of the First World War. He had served as a medical corps orderly in France in 1917 and had been decorated for carrying wounded men off the battlefield under fire. He was 42, the oldest of the 4. Reverend Clark Vandersall Poling was from the Reformed Church of America. His father was a well-known minister, and Clark had grown up in a household where faith was not abstract. He was 32 years old. Before he sailed, he had written his father a letter asking him not to pray for his safe return, but to pray that he would have the courage to do his duty. Rabbi Alexander Goode was the only Jewish member of the group. He was 32 years old, had a PhD in Oriental languages, and had been working on a book about the sociology of American Judaism when the war interrupted him. He was thoughtful, quiet, and spoke several languages. He had a wife and an infant daughter at home in York, Pennsylvania. These 4 men had bunked near each other on the Dorchester. They had talked. Witnesses from the voyage recalled that the 4 of them got along in the particular way that men of faith sometimes do across denominational lines, easily, without competition, recognizing something familiar in each other. When the torpedo hit, the 4 chaplains were already awake and moving before most others had registered what had happened. The scene on the Dorchester was what chaos looks like when men who have been trained for orderly emergencies face something that has moved faster than training allows. Men were trying to reach life jackets stored in lockers below decks. The listing of the ship made movement difficult. In the dark, some men were disoriented about which direction led up to the deck. The cold was immediate and total. The water flooding through the lower decks was below freezing. The 4 chaplains appeared on deck. What they did was not complicated. It was not clever. It was the thing that was needed, and it was done with a consistency across 27 minutes that survivors would spend the rest of their lives struggling to describe. They moved through the crowd of men on deck, calming, directing, helping men into life jackets. They translated instructions. They prayed with men who were praying. They held men who were frozen with fear. A soldier named William Bednar, who survived floating in the water for several hours, said later, "I could hear men crying and men praying, and above it all I could hear the chaplains praying. Not for themselves, for us." The cold was relentless. Even on deck, the temperature was well below freezing, and spray came over the railing in sheets. Men were pulling on life jackets with numb hands. Some could not manage the buckles. The chaplains moved among them, fastening straps, speaking in voices that witnesses described as calm. Not calm in the way of men who were unafraid, but calm in the way of men who had decided their fear was not the relevant thing. Father Washington was heard singing. Not loudly, not performing, but low and steady, the kind of singing that is for yourself first and for others incidentally. Reverend Fox, who had walked across a battlefield in France in 1917 to reach wounded men, moved with the economy of someone who had been in chaos before and learned what it required. Rabbi Goode prayed in Hebrew and then in English, sometimes mid-sentence, switching languages for the men nearest to him. Reverend Poling's letter home, the one asking his father not to pray for his survival, only for his courage, had been written 6 weeks earlier. Those who spoke with him in those 27 minutes said he appeared, against all logic, to have found what he had asked for. The life jackets ran out. This is the moment. This is what you need to understand. There were not enough life jackets on deck for every man who needed one. The ship had an official supply, But the explosion and the flooding had trapped many of them below, and in the dark and the listing chaos, men had missed them or been unable to reach them. There were men on deck without life jackets. All 4 chaplains removed their own life jackets and gave them away. For different men received those 4 jackets. Their names are in the record. They survived. The 4 chaplains did not survive. Witnesses in the water. Men who had gone over the side and were floating in life jackets, some clutching debris, some already dying from the cold, turned back and looked at the Dorchester. They saw the 4 chaplains standing at the rail. The accounts from different survivors, who did not know each other and gave testimony independently over the following weeks and years, are consistent on this point. The 4 men were standing together. They had linked arms. They were praying. The Dorchester went under at approximately 1:22 in the morning, 27 minutes after the torpedo struck. The water temperature was 26 degrees Fahrenheit. Of the 902 men aboard, 230 survived. 672 died. None of the 4 chaplains' bodies were ever recovered. The story reached home before most of those who survived could tell it. A military chaplain who interviewed the survivors in Greenland wrote a report that circulated through the army and eventually reached the press. By the spring of 1943, the story of the 4 chaplains was in newspapers across the United States. What struck people was the particular detail that would not let go. 4 men, from 4 different faiths, arm in arm, praying together as the ship went down. In 1943, when the country was exhausted and afraid and searching for something to hold on to, that image meant something that went beyond the military. It meant that the things which divided people, faith, background, denomination, had not mattered, at the end, to 4 men who had chosen to give up their lives for strangers. All 4 were posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and the Purple Heart. The survivors who had been pulled from the water in the early hours of February 3rd were taken to a base in Greenland. Many of them had frostbite. Several lost fingers and toes. They were interviewed, treated, and eventually shipped back to continue their service or, in many cases, to go home. Every one of them who could speak about what they had seen described the same final image. 4 men at the rail, arms linked, praying. But Congress wanted to do something more specific, something that would not be diluted by comparison. In 1960, after years of legislative effort, they passed a special act creating the 4 Chaplains Medal. A one-time decoration that cannot be awarded to anyone else, ever, for any reason. It was designed so that what these 4 men did would stand alone. So that no future act of military valor, however extraordinary, could be placed in the same category. The 4 Chaplains Memorial Chapel was dedicated in Philadelphia in 1951. President Harry Truman, who attended the ceremony, described the 4 men as an inspiration for a generation. He was not wrong, but the word inspiration is not quite large enough. Every year on February 3rd, there are memorial services in the United States, in synagogues and churches and American Legion halls, for 4 men who have been dead for more than 80 years. Their families are still found at some of those services. The daughter Rabbi Goode left at home in York, Pennsylvania, the infant he never came back to, is in her 80s now. She carries the letter her father wrote from aboard the ship. It is addressed to her mother. It says, among other things, that he knows God will take care of his family, and that he is not afraid. He was 32 years old when he wrote it. He had 6 weeks left. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold front. New stories every week.